Welcome! My name is Miss Christy and I am a teaching artist. Today we are in a special place for our virtual art studio. I am here today at the Hilliard Art Museum on the campus of University of Louisiana at Lafayette. And this artwork behind me is considered a mural or an installation, and we are going to create our own art project based on this work. This video is part of the Acadiana Center for the Arts virtual art studio, where we teaching artists bring you art lessons that could be in visual art, music, dance, and more that you can enjoy from anywhere. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to create sponge stamps to create your own artwork. Today we are going to be talking to Miss Callie about the work in this gallery space. She works in education here at the museum. The museum invites young people to come in and do tours, and Callie is here to explain what this artwork is all about. So let's go meet her.
Hello, welcome to the Hilliard Art Museum. My name is Callie and I work in education here. And to welcome you into our galleries. This show right now, called 20 Years of Marais Press, Imprinting a Campus and a Collection, is open until August 10th of this year, so there's plenty of time to come and see it. There are over 270 works of art in this room, so it is full of so much to come and explore. This exhibit is about the printmaking press here at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette that has been running for 20 years. It is an incredible learning space for our college students to get to work with professional artists. So each year, the professor who's in charge of this press, Brian Kelly, brings in at least 3 to 6 professional artists who come and make a series of prints with his students. So a print, like Miss Christy is doing in the activity today, can involve stamping. It can also involve carving or sketching on different surfaces like wood or metal. So in this room, there are so many different types of printmaking styles. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at some of the art we have here. Okay, so here we have a very different printmaking technique than Raluca Iancu's, which was stamp making method, more like that. But this is a lithograph, which means printing on stone. So it is a very heavy stone that I'm holding, and the artist uses a special grease waxy pencil to draw on top of the stone. As you can see, it is quite heavy. And whenever the print is made, a piece of paper is put on top, and this is rolled through a giant press.
Thank you, Miss Callie, for giving us a tour of the Marais Press show. I'd like for us to get a closer look at this work. You can see the roadways behind me. You can see little cars that have been stamped on, bicycles. And in some of these places, you can actually see that she has recreated car accidents, because one of the things that Raluca Iancu is interested in is what happens when we are in these car accidents. What happens to our bodies? What happens to the car? What happens to the road? If there are other things involved, sometimes there might be animals involved in an accident. She even has some of that in this artwork. If you've ever been to a big city, you've probably seen roadways that cross one on top of the other. And she has kind of recreated that here. And she's used something called overlap. Have you ever heard of that before? Overlap is when one thing is in front of another. And so you can see with some of these roadways, one goes right over the top of the other. She's also done artwork with train tracks. So let's go ahead and take a closer look. In this one, you can see 1, 2, 3 different cars are involved in this accident. And it almost like it shows the time that this car took to get to this place. Things are interacting just like we interact in everyday life, whether it's on the road or at school or in a store, we all have these shared spaces where we come together and then part ways. I like how she uses the gray, which most roadways are gray, and these bright colors to show the different, almost like characters in a story. So we have this kind of red, violet, a blue, primary blue, and the yellow working together to show these 3 different groups of people, or if you think of them as families in the car, it kind of gives you the idea of a story. You'll notice in this one that there's a bicycle, an 18-wheeler, maybe a smaller truck, some cars. And I think what this shows is that we all share the road. And we have to be very careful when we're on the road, whether we're on a bicycle or in a car. We have to watch where we're going and make sure that we don't collide with someone and end up getting hurt. Iancu uses these arrows to perhaps show the direction that these cars crashed into each other. This artist explores disaster, memory, and vulnerability. Do you know what that means? Do you remember the hurricanes that we've experienced and how scary those can be sometimes? If something's ever happened to your house with a flood or even just big tree branches falling in your yard, they make art so that it's easier for us to talk about things that might be painful. Things have a big impact, or they affect our lives in ways that change us or change our thinking. So Raluca Iancu creates artwork to talk about natural disasters like hurricanes or car accidents. Our car might be damaged, but our bodies might be damaged too. So we might have a broken leg, or we might have a bump on the head, and in any of those, it takes time for us to recover. So what artists often do when they make work like this is they open up a conversation. They make art so that it's easier for us to talk about things that might be painful. I have some of her other artwork here to show you. I particularly like these because we've been through so many different hurricanes. She does work called, on her website, Natural Disasters. And you can see in this one, there's a house with a tree that's fallen on a car. This print shows those trains all colliding in one. And then she also has this picture of what might even be a costume of a car. So she's interested in the things that we use to go from one place to another. When we're inside of our car, we are essentially in a box, and that box on wheels is moving from one place to another, and we have to be really careful so that we don't run into someone else's car. Here you can see a picture of her, and next to her is a series of prints that she made. And if you look closely, you can see the printing press in the background. This is how she has made most of this work. She is a printmaker. And that means you are able to make more than one copy of the artwork that you create. Let's go to the table and start on our project. The materials that you'll need for this project are a sheet of construction paper. You can use any color you want, but I'm going to be using gray, just like she's used to represent the concrete that our streets are made of. You'll need sponges, the kind that you usually wash dishes with. This is an opportunity to reuse materials instead of throwing them away. So if your family has an old sponge that they want to get rid of, you can clean it, dry it, and then we are going to be cutting it out in different shapes. You'll need a marker, scissors, and if you want to back your work with a piece of plastic, you can use a recycled milk jug or a food container and some liquid glue. So let's get started. Always write your name on your artwork so your teacher or your parents know whose artwork is whose. My name is Christy, so I am going to write Christy on my artwork. You go ahead and write your name right there on the back. The first thing you'll need is a dry sponge and an idea of what shapes you want to make. I have here a stop sign, which is what kind of shape? It's an octagon. So I have this already printed out. If you don't have shapes to start with, you can just draw it by hand. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And think about using just half of the sponge for this shape and half of the sponge for a different shape. You're going to use your scissors to cut it out. If you're having a little bit of trouble because it's difficult to cut, go ahead and ask for help. You're going to cut each side. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And take your time. 6, 7, 8. All right, there I have my first shape. I'm also going to do some different shapes to represent train tracks or the ties of a train. You can cut just rectangular shapes that are very simple. You can also cut curved shapes. And these are the pieces that you'll use to stamp with. A good idea to back your pieces is with a piece of plastic. I have one here that I used a milk carton and I cut out a rectangle and glued it onto the other side of my sponge to have something to hold on to. I have here a half of a milk carton. You can position the shape over the top. Do the same thing where you trace the shape out and then cut. That'll also protect your hands from getting full of paint or ink. The next thing you're going to do is figure out which colors you want to use. I have here a paper plate. You can also use a food tray or a lid to a container, something to hold your paint to put your stamp down into. I'm going to use a paper plate, and I'm going to start with blue. I'm going to start with a curved shape, and I'm going to dip the shape into the paint. Right. If I flip the stamp over, you can see the side here doesn't have any paint yet. So just make sure the surface of the stamp on the paint side is completely covered. Once you have the sponge loaded with your paint, you can begin to create your image. Raluca Iancu uses curved lines that intersect, so I'm going to start over here on this side with a curved line, and you're going to press down gently. You want to keep the shape of the sponge. You don't want it to splatter out too much and lose your shape. Once you have one, you can turn it over and go the other direction. You can probably get 3 stamps out of each load of paint. That was 2, and this is 3. So I'm going to go back in and get some more paint. And I'm going to go the other direction. She has a lot of lines that intersect or cross over each other. Get a little more paint. You can actually use your paper plate to test the shape and see if that is loaded enough and if you like the way the shape looks. Here we're using a curved line to create almost like a river. Come back around this way, and you just play. You don't have to do the same pattern that I'm doing. You can choose, how do you want to put your shapes and lines? So I'm just going to keep doing this. I also have some small ones to kind of change up the curves a little bit. You can come in with a new line of curved shapes. And just keep going. You can cross over what you've already put. Don't feel like it has to be separated. We can think of this as the rivers in our cities. Do you know what river we have here in Lafayette, Louisiana? If you said the Vermilion River, you're right. Our river is the Vermilion River. So we have several bridges that go over the river and roadways that are next to the river. And what do you think happens to trash when it rains? That trash ends up in the river. Wait for this to dry, or you can keep going. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a new color. So you might have noticed that Iancu used a lot of arrows in her work. And I'm going to put in a few arrows. So what are the shapes an arrow is made up of? Line. And so I have a triangle here, and that is the pointing part of our arrow. press that down. She uses a lot of train tracks in her artwork. And if you've ever seen tracks before, there's the large pieces of wood that go across the track, and then there's the metal piece that the train is on. And we're going to use just a straight piece of sponge to create those train tracks. So I have this small, thin, straight line, and I'm just going to go from one side and start making lines side by side. Do you know what it's called when lines are side by side that never cross? Parallel. If you said parallel lines, you're right. So railroad ties are parallel lines. So I did a curved line going this way with my train tracks, and I'm going to do a straight line going down the page. So again, you can do your own lines and shapes. You can see that when I don't load the sponge, it starts to get lighter and lighter. You can use that if you want to, or load your sponge with more paint. Let's put in a little train. I have this sponge here. What color do you think my train should be? How about green? So I have a little green train car here, and I'm just going to go right over my tracks. Should I show dipping it in the paint more? No? I think I'm going to put another arrow right here. Whenever you're working on your artwork, think about where you want those shapes to go. You can choose how you put your lines and shapes. Art is not about being perfect, it's about making something new. And in this way, you can create your own roadways, your own train tracks, and your own river. I zoomed in so that you can see the texture of the paint and the way that the sponge makes these shapes. And I also wanted to use my stop sign shape, my octagon, in a meaningful way. So I have it here. And this artist's work is trying to raise awareness about the environment and how we have an effect on the environment. So when we litter on the roadways, it ends up in our water supply. And so this is a symbol. It's not really a stop sign, and this isn't really a train track, but it symbolizes these things that we use to transport our goods, the things that we buy at the grocery store, or it symbolizes the roadways that we travel on. So I'm going to use this stop sign to symbolize being aware of how we affect the environment and that we need to stop being careless. So I'm going to go ahead and put that right here in the center of my arrows. And I've loaded the octagon with red paint. And I'm going to carefully lift it up so that you can see. So the edges are a little bit jagged because the paint kind of squishes out. So I'm going to try to get those edges to look as straight as I can. I've also had this dry a little bit so that when I come back over with another color or another layer of shapes, you can see the new layer a little bit better. I'm going to try to get this bottom part of the stop sign to be straighter and print it a little bit darker. So after this dries, I can come back in and write stop on there. I can also add more shapes if I wanted to. I want you to remember that this is your artwork and you can put your shapes in any arrangement that you want, and think about what each shape and color might represent. I want to thank you for creating with me today. I want to invite you all to come here on March 19th, 2022 for our pop-up art activity that we're going to have here at the Hilliard Art Museum on the UL Lafayette campus. At the same time that Festival Acadiana is going to be going on right next door at Girard Park. So please come visit me. I will be here and we're going to be making art together. This Let's Make Art pop-up art lesson is going to be from 10 to noon. It's free to the public, and I want you to come back next week for another virtual art studio. Bye.